Hola amigos, this is Level 12, and today we are back with our third installment of World War I Hetalia Edition. In today's episode, we will be talking about the global war of World War I, which involves three sections: East Asia, German maritime advancements, and Africa. I'll be honest with you right here, Africa is going to be some really heavy broad strokes because neither my book nor my teacher explained the war in Africa very well, so please bear with me when we get to that. Prior to World War I, Germany worked hard to make its navy as good, if not better, than the British one. In certain aspects, they succeeded. However, most of their important harbors were not near Germany at all. Germany had a vast empire in the Pacific Islands of Southeast Asia, which is where our friend Captain von Spee comes into the picture. That is Spee. See, Spee was causing literal havoc all over the Pacific, which was his job, by the way. Basically, and Britain wanted to cut off his communications and refueling stations, which were all those tiny little islands you see dotted in yellow. Those were all German-owned. They did this by slowly capturing Germany's Pacific Islands. The first island they captured was Samoa, where New Zealand troops pretty much just pulled up to the island and demanded a surrender. I think maybe less than 10 people died. Next was New Pomerania, where brisk action was taken by the Australians, where they won. Eventually, they were able to take over the whole of New Guinea. With these victories, Australia and New Zealand claimed many of these islands for themselves and for the Union, meaning Britain. While not necessarily a goal at this time, Britain surely expanded its empire. However, these islands really weren't detrimental to Germany. Even the Kaiser wasn't too worried about losing these territories. The big fish in all this was German-owned Tsingtao, where the red mark is on the map. Here, the harbor was home to many German merchant ships and other sea vessels. If Britain could take over Tsingtao, that would be a huge blow to the German Navy. The only problem was it wasn't easily accessible. Also, something to state right now, China is neutral in this, but its harbors and stuff were carved up in some other kind of deal I don't have time to explain. Enter Japan. Britain saw Japan as an ally because of its impressive navy size and proximity to Tsingtao. Japan already was on friendly terms with the British, and some of the governmental staff were actually Anglophiles, which is a weird word, but okay. Japan also realized that by helping the British, they could otherwise invade neutral China and take over other little nearby islands. This alliance was very beneficial for both sides. On August 23rd, Japan declared war on Germany. Japan's involvement in the war pretty much ends and begins with the invasion of Tsingtao, but nevertheless, it was an important victory for the Entente. So, Germany was very much prepared for an invasion via the sea, and had very few land fortifications. Therefore, Japan wanted to do an amphibious assault on the mainland. Only problem with that is, China as a whole, again, was neutral. So, if Britain supported Japan, it would break China's neutrality. And Britain didn't care. By the way, this would not be the last time Britain broke a country's neutrality when it suited them. Remember Belgium? Remember what got England into the war? Okay, great. Also, just a fun fact. The Japanese couldn't tell the difference between British and Germans, so the Japanese gave the British soldiers kimonos, and in this old documentary I watched from the 60s, they said kimonos wrong. It was like kimono or something like that. It was great. On November 7th, the Germans surrendered at Tsingtao, and Japanese soldiers were back home before Christmas. In this victory, Japan delivered to China 21's demands. These didn't exactly go as planned because of some internal stuff, but in the end, Japan had control over a large portion of China, including Manchuria, which that is always fought over, and other Pacific islands. Also, China was in a bit of turmoil at this time, so Japan took advantage of that and took control over more of China. Thus, the Japanese economy prospered off the backs of Chinese laborers. Because of this, China declared war on Germany in 1917, not because it wanted to fight Germany, but because of all of Japan's meddling. It was hoping that once the war ended and peace talks were initiated, it could regain some of the territory it had lost to Japan, which I think it did. Back to Spee. Whatever. Losing Tsingtao was a major blow to Germany's East Asia squadron, but that really wasn't Spee's concern. See, Spee believed in cruiser warfare, which was basically using inferior ships to sink enemy merchant and supply ships. This would cause superior ships to chase the cruisers around. There was a point at which Spee did abandon cruiser warfare, which caused a man named Karl von Mueller, the other guy on the screen, to detach from Spey's fleet in a ship called Emden to continue causing havoc. Euler continued cruiser warfare for a couple of months, quickly becoming a thorn in the Entente's side. His mischief including putting up a fake smokestack to make his ship look like one of Britain's, and pretending to be an ally only to sink an enemy ship later, and harboring members of enemy ships until dropping them off somewhere. Mueller was a character, and I'm pretty sure it was because he was Prussian. However, his exploits came to an end when an Australian vessel named Sydney sunk the Emden on November 9th. Surprisingly, this wasn't the end of Mueller, as he actually made a harrowing journey to Constantinople, and he died in 1923. Yet Spey was still out there, and Britain was determined to get him. Britain learned that Spey was heading South America to refuel, so it sent ships out to go and capture it. Enter Captain Craddock, who was kinda dumb. He didn't have any proper ships to actually attack Spey, and the one proper ship he could have gotten, the engineer of it was crazy and told him some bonkers information. It's great. He didn't have any proper ships to actually attack Spey should he find the guy, but his orders were orders from the First Lord Admiralty, Winston Churchill. We know the guy. He's great. Basically, Churchill wanted Craddock to run Spey down at any cost. What ensued next was the Battle of Coronel off the coast of Chile. On November 1st, Craddock found Spey's fleet and attempted to attack while the sun was setting in the Germans' eyes. However, he didn't. He went in without guns that couldn't reach the German ships, so I don't know what really his game plan was. My book didn't explain it. It was just he could have left, but he didn't. And I'm like, what? In any event, once the sun went down, Craddock could no longer see the German ships, yet the red sky perfectly silhouetted the British ships. Spey decided to open fire and sunk the Good Hope and the Monmouth, which were British ships. Craddock also died in this conflict. Spey met his demise in the Battle of the Falklands. Seeking blood, Britain deployed 2 battle cruisers to meet Spey at the Falklands. They were called Inflexible and Invincible. They reached the Falklands on December 7th, after some T maneuvering, as shown by the map, which is where you try to be the top of the T, so all of your guns are facing the ship. My teacher explained it. All but one of his ships were sunk that day. Spey's 2 sons also perished in this battle. I think Spey also died. The British victory in the Falklands all but put an end to German maritime chaos. There were a few more isolated incidents here and there, but nothing major, nothing like Spey. Instead, Germany's focus honed in on Africa, where it had a few colonies there. So now we get into the war with Africa, which, I'll be honest with you all, was a little confusing and hard to grasp because a lot happened in such a short time span. And if I get some things out of order, I'm sorry, this was not a very linear chapter, again. So no one really wanted to bring the war to Africa, least of all Britain. This is how Africa was split up, by the way. However, Germany figured if it took over and harassed English colonies, it could divert British attention from the Western Front. In this respect, Germany was kind of successful. I have no doubt that Britain wasted a lot of men and supplies that otherwise would not have had Germany not started screwing around in Africa, but it wasn't anything detrimental to the Western Front. The main antagonist in this entire Africa debacle was a man named Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, who we will refer to as Lettow. He basically led the British on a wild goose chase, as seen by the map, through Africa and was never officially defeated by the British. And while Lettow did succeed in making the British spend an excess amount of men and resources chasing him, it did not have the overall major impact he was looking for. Also, most of this took place in German East Africa. I also think he was Prussian, which is why he was like this. The next major German African campaign was in the Cameroons, which actually wasn't that bad. The Germans realized they were surrounded by Allied colonies on all sides and were just like, what now? In 1916, instead of trying to fight, Commander Zimmermann ordered everyone to flee to neutral Spanish territory. This retreat was pretty successful, and the Spanish actually treated the Germans pretty well, if only because they lacked the manpower to treat them poorly. They could intern them or anything. The final major conflict was to deal with the South Africa. Now, some background. Roughly 12 years prior, the Boer Wars had been fought, where Britain came out victorious. Here's where things get a little divisive. Despite still smarting over the loss, South Africa still went to war on the British on the side of the British. The campaign was led by a guy named Jan Smuts, who was probably a racist white guy, that wanted to show the superiority of white people in battle. His campaign was bad. I think at one point he had 100% horse wastage due to some disease carried by flies. It's great. Germany did try to fan the flames of insurrection of South Africans that wanted to go against the British, but they didn't arrive in time. Eventually, South Africa took over the German colony of Southwest Africa and just kind of ran it until 1919. Now, conflict in Africa continued well into 1918, but those were the major points in the war in Africa. This is also where the stirrings of revolution started in Africa, of people being like, hey, we don't want to be colonized anymore, which is good. Colonizing people is bad. But this is also partly why modern divisions of Africa are debated, because it was a bunch of white people pretty much arbitrarily drawing lines without respect to certain tribes and ethnic groups. This is horrible. I want to take a moment to just explain something real quick. Whenever I learn about World War I and World War II, it's through a very Eurocentric lens, which my book even pointed that out. So this was the first time I ever learned about the war in Africa, and I am very sorry I could not do it more justice, especially because the British used a lot of Africans as glorified pack mules to deliver supplies to white troops that basically caused the British to starve the Africans, so enough supplies were delivered. Also, while not necessarily a goal of any white power, many of them continued with the ideas of imperialism while they campaigned/fought in Africa. It's an entire debacle that I wish I had better knowledge of. I will admit, also, one of the things that happened, which was kind of a goal, was conscription, which was getting people to go fight the war on the Western Front. Those that did go to Europe were actually treated with some semblance of decency, so I guess that's good. So anyways, that's it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. I think I went kind of fast, so I'm a little bit sorry for that. But I hope you enjoyed, as I said. The next episode will be out next week. It will be on the Ottoman Empire. I'm kind of excited. Anyways, let me know what you guys think of this episode in the comments below. And if you know anything about African history and World War I, please feel free to share it in the comments. I would love to learn a lot more about it. Anyways, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more random fandom things. Ciao, chicos.